15 insanely underrated games trashed by critics. Mad Max. Oh man, Mad Max. Let's talk about this gem. This game got a lot of flack when it came out, but honestly, it's one of those trust me, play it experiences. First off, if you're into that whole gritty, apocalyptic vibe like scavenging through deserts, smashing up cars, and just being a total badass, this game nails it. The world feels massive and bleak in the best way. Like every corner of the Wasteland has something interesting and gnarly convoy to take down, some poor scavenger begging for water, or just a brutal brawl waiting to happen. The combat? Oh, it's chunky. It's like Batman Arkham but with more broken noses and sand in your face. And then there's the car stuff. You've got this sick ride, the Magnum Opus, that you can upgrade into a beast of destruction. Want to deck it out with harpoons and flamethrowers? Go for it. The vehicular combat is so satisfying, tearing apart enemy vehicles while blasting across dunes. Chef's kiss. Critics kind of dumped on it for being repetitive or too much open world fluff, but honestly, that fluff is the fun part. It's all about the vibe, the freedom, and losing yourself in the chaos of this world. Plus, the story is just fine, but it gives your character motivation to build the Magnum Opus. It's not captivating, but it's not in the way of you having fun either. If you skipped Mad Max because of those reviews, you're missing out. Give it a shot, you'll feel like the king of the Wasteland, and honestly, what's better than that? Ryse, Son of Rome. Okay, this game got kinda trashed when it first dropped back in 2013, but honestly, it's aged like a fine wine and might be worth your time now. So, Ryse was one of the big launch titles for the Xbox One, developed by Crytek, and yeah, it was a total flex for showing off the console's power. The visuals, absolutely jaw-dropping even by today's standards. You play as Marius Titus, this badass Roman soldier, on a revenge mission after his family gets brutally murdered. The whole thing is set in ancient Rome and the vibe is just chef's kiss. But here's the deal, critics weren't exactly kind to it at the start. Everyone loved how good it looked, but the combat. People said it got super repetitive. It's mostly hack and slash with a heavy dose of quick time events during executions. And yeah, the campaign was pretty short too. Add in the super linear design and it left a lot of players feeling like there wasn't much to dig into. Fast forward to now though, and Ryse is getting a bit of a second chance. It's on PC, often goes on sale for dirt cheap, and people are starting to appreciate it for what it is, a gorgeous cinematic revenge story with easy to pick up combat. Sure, it's not Devil May Cry levels of depth, but it's fun in that switch your brain off and slice some enemies kind of way. Plus, the visuals still hold up ridiculously well. Ancient Rome has never looked cooler in a game. So here's the bottom line if you skipped Ryse back in the day. Now's a good time to give it a shot. Yeah, it's not perfect, but if you're into cinematic action games with amazing historical settings, it's absolutely worth a look. Alpha Protocol. Alright, let me tell you about Alpha Protocol. This one's a bit of a wild card. It's a spy RPG from Obsidian that came out in 2010, and while it didn't exactly blow people away back then, it's become this underground favorite over the years. You play as Michael Thornton, a rookie spy who's just joined a secret US agency. The cool thing about this game is how it blends classic RPG mechanics with a modern espionage story. It's like a mix of James Bond and Mass Effect. Every decision you make, whether it's how you treat people or the missions you take, shapes the story in some pretty wild ways. You can build relationships, burn bridges, and completely change how things play out. It's one of those games where you feel like you're writing your own spy movie. But here's the deal, it's not exactly polished. At launch, people weren't too thrilled about the clunky combat, some wonky AI, and a bunch of bugs that could really kill the vibe. EGene called it awkward and glitchy, which sums it up pretty well. Still, even back then, the story and the choices you got to make stood out as something special.
Hey, yeah. And considering that item post...
These days though, Alpha Protocol has a way of sticking with people. Sure, it's still got its quirks, but if you love a good story and like games where your choices actually feel important, it's worth a shot. The whole spy meets RPG setup is still really unique, and the narrative depth kind of makes you forget about the janky stuff. So yeah, it's not perfect, but it's the kind of game you'll think about long after you're done. If you can deal with some rough edges, Alpha Protocol is definitely worth a look. Spec Ops: The Line. This one's a masterpiece that didn't get the love it deserved when it came out, but man, if you're into deep, thought-provoking stories and games, this is the one to check out. So, on the surface, it looks like your standard military shooter, right? Your Captain Martin Walker heading into a sandstorm-destroyed Dubai with your squad to find a missing colonel and his team. But the more you play, the more you realize this isn't just another shooty bang bang kind of game. It gets dark, like mess with your head and make you question everything dark. Here's the thing, critics kind of brushed it off back in 2012 because yeah, the gameplay is pretty basic. It's a solid third-person cover shooter, but it doesn't really do anything groundbreaking in terms of mechanics. And the multiplayer, let's be honest, it was tacked on and forgettable. But the story, wow, that's where this game shines.
Conrad's command team.
It's inspired by Heart of Darkness, and the way it flips the whole heroic soldier trope on its head is just brutal. The choices you make aren't the typical good versus evil. Stuff they're messy, morally gray, and they'll leave you sitting there controller in hand, questioning your life decisions and the endings. Oh, they hit hard. Multiple endings depending on what you do, and none of them let you off easy. It's the kind of story that sticks with you long after the credits roll. Visually, it's got this unique vibe with the sand-covered ruins of Dubai, and the atmosphere is heavy, like you feel the weight of everything going on. It's not a game you play to feel like a hero, it's a game you play to feel like a human, flaws and all. Days Gone. So, here's the deal. When Days Gone first came out in 2019, critics weren't too kind to it. The biggest complaints, repetitive missions, a world that felt a little too empty, and some technical issues, bugs, frame drops, you name it. And honestly, yeah, those bugs were a pain at launch. Plus, it didn't help that the game was up against some massive AAA releases at the time, so it kinda got buried. But here's the thing, players loved it, or at least grew to love it. And now that it's had updates and patches, the game has turned into a really solid experience. First off, the story is better than people gave it credit for. Deacon might seem like your typical gruff anti-hero, but his journey is genuinely emotional. His relationship with Sarah, his wife, and even his bond with his best friend, Boozer, are what really drive the game forward. It's not just about surviving, it's about finding purpose in a world that's fallen apart. And let's talk about the hordes. This is where Days Gone shines. The freaker hordes are terrifying, like hundreds of them chasing you down in real time. It's pure chaos, but in the best way. You're setting traps, throwing Molotovs, and just trying to survive. It's such a rush, and honestly, it's what sets this game apart. Then, there's the bike. Your motorcycle isn't just a vehicle, it's practically a character. You'll need to upgrade it, maintain it, and refuel it. It adds this layer of survival that feels really unique. Plus, the way it handles is just fun. Cruising through the beautiful Pacific Northwest while listening to the soundtrack, chef's kiss. Now that it's on PC, it looks better than ever with improved performance and graphics. If you're into open world games with a bit of heart and you're okay with things starting slow, Days Gone is totally worth your time. It's one of those games that might surprise you if you give it a chance. Quantum Break. This game tried to do something really different. It mixed a third-person action game with a live-action TV show. Yep, you play a part of the story, and then you watch episodes that connect to what just happened. It's a cool idea, but it didn't land perfectly with everyone. An actually coherent and interesting time travel story, tragic characters, twists, and overall kept me way more hooked than I thought. It also has amazing graphics. Seriously looks better than many games today, and it's like 8 years old now. The time-breaking scenes alone are breathtaking. Gameplay is simple yet a lot of fun and really satisfying, really makes you feel like in a movie. The TV show is surprisingly well done and well acted, much better than most TV today, although not sure I liked the show being pushed in between levels. But the mad part was the lack of enemy variety and the overall pacing of the game. Too many cutscenes for a game with whole TV show breaks. They should have tried to go the more Uncharted route and let you play during the carnage as the world is blowing up around you. Also, the enemy variety was kinda meh, could have used 1 or 2 more specials or something to spice it up. And now, the bad thing was the platforming sections sucked. Like, controls were floaty and didn't feel good. And there was no skill to them, so why even do them? Was odd why they were even in the game. Rarely had to use your brain to figure it out either. They could have done some crazy puzzles with the time stuff but failed. But these are still just some minor complaints. Overall, really solid game that I wish more people got to experience. Not perfect, but so much more polished and filled with passion than 80% of the games of service bullshit that we get nowadays. Plus, it tried something really unique by melding the TV show with games. Wasn't a perfect fit, but I give EM credit for trying. Check the game out if you haven't yet. the Callisto Protocol. This one came out in December 2022, and if you're a fan of Dead Space, it probably caught your eye. It's made by Striking Distance Studios, led by Glenn Schofield, yet one of the creators of Dead Space. So naturally the expectations were sky high. The game puts you in the shoes of Jacob Lee, a cargo pilot who gets thrown into Black Iron Prison on Callisto, one of Jupiter's moons. Things go south pretty fast when inmates start turning into these creepy monsters called biophages. Your job? Survive and figure out what's going on. Now, when it launched, the reviews were kind of all over the place. Some critics loved the creepy vibe and gory action, calling it a solid follow-up to Dead Space, but others, not so much. The combat was one of the big complaints. Dodging attacks is a big part of the gameplay, but it's clunky and frustrating at times. Plus, the game had a rough start on PC with stuttering and performance issues that annoyed a lot of players. That said, the game absolutely nails the atmosphere. The graphics are stunning and the prison setting is super eerie. The sound design, amazing. Every little creep, growl, or scream adds to the tension, making you feel like something could jump out at any second. So here's the deal, the Callisto Protocol is a mixed bag. If you're into survival horror and can push through some frustrating mechanics and technical issues, it's worth a look. It's not perfect, but the creepy vibe and insane visuals might just make it worth your time. Just don't go in expecting a Dead Space level masterpiece. The Evil Within. This game is just very horrifying. One of the first games that actually scared me and made me scared just by playing it. I compare it to Silent Hill, one of the few games that I had to play with lights on. So basically it's a good game that I think holds up quite well. It kept me quite engaged coming from someone not hugely into survival horror games, and too freaking scared shitless from playing horror games. So overall I enjoyed this game more than I thought it would. I'd seen the sequel for sale for some time and I had never got around to buying it, but they're on Xbox Game Pass, so I gave it a go. I think the first chapter was in your face and had me keen to see how the rest of it went. Reviews at its release mentioned a few dated mechanics, but this clearly isn't an issue at this point. Overall, I think the game held up well. The overall aesthetic helped with this. I'm not usually into survival horror. I recently tried Silent Hill 2 Remake and literally had to use mods to get through it. Now don't get me wrong, I still enjoyed the game, but sometimes they just stress me out. Anyways, this one had an engaging enough story with plenty of what the f moments to keep it interesting and me keen to see the end. I almost gave up in one of the earlier chapters because of this approach, but I'm glad I stuck with it. I'll hit a few palette refresh games in between as the stress of the game meant I was glad I finished it. If you have Xbox Game Pass and any curiosity, fire it up. If the first chapter doesn't grab you even a bit, move on, otherwise strap in. The Order 1886. The Order 1886 is without a doubt one of the most overhated games of last generation. The story isn't bad at all. My only real complaint is that I would have loved to have had more time with the Lycan's half-breeds, but for what we got, I'm not complaining too much. The game starts off on a wild note in the present day, where you escape out of prison and then goes back to past events and moves forward from there. The Order itself seemed like a complex group that had multiple layers and motives within it from the start. The characters were memorable, and were all fronted by extremely well done voice acting performances, rivaling many movies and TV series I've seen. The gunplay is phenomenal, with genuinely unique guns such as the thermite gun. Firing every gun feels solid, with a fair amount of recoil, realistic damage, and amazing sound effects with each shot. Even hand-to-hand combat felt good, such as in the beginning prison part I found that incapacitating the guards without a weapon felt like a realistic struggle, where you can actually feel their life end by your hands via a slow death. I know this game got absolutely lambasted for its length, especially with many critics claiming it was only 4 hours or so, or basically the length of a long movie. I'm not sure how on earth they were playing it, but it took me a good 8 or 9 hours to get through the game, which in my opinion is not nearly as offensive of a length as 4 hours. Many games these days get away with being less than 8 hours and being $60, so why did this game get dragged through the dirt? Personally, I think it boils down to the current obsession with game length at the time. I think this obsession started with Skyrim and got really bad in 2015 with gamers, looking to current releases like Witcher 3 and Fallout 4, and setting them as the gold standard in game length. I definitely think most gamers are past that now, with many becoming tired of overly bloated Ubisoft open worlds, for example. I think we've come back to the point of appreciating shorter, more airtight experiences. I think the game length issue with The Order 1886 could have been an easier pill to swallow if this game came out at $30 or maybe $40. Vampyr. Alright, let's talk about Vampyr. This is one of those games that tries to mix a lot of different ideas, and while it doesn't nail everything, it's got a vibe that's worth checking out if you're into dark, moody stories. So, you play as Dr. Jonathan Reed, a guy who's just come back from World War I and surprised you're now a vampire. The game's set in 1918 London during the Spanish flu pandemic, so it's got this gloomy, eerie atmosphere that feels perfect for a story like this. The setting alone is super immersive, dark alleys, foggy streets, and that constant sense of dread. It's great. The cool thing about Vampyr is how it handles choices. You're a doctor, so you're supposed to help people, but you're also a vampire, which means you need to feed to get stronger. The game constantly forces you to decide, do you help people and stay weaker, or do you feed on them for more power but deal with the consequences? And it's not just black and white, every character has a backstory, and killing someone can mess up the whole balance of the area. It makes you think before you act. Now, the combat, this is where the game stumbles a bit. You get some cool vampiric powers, melee weapons, and guns, but it doesn't feel as smooth as it should. It's not bad, but it's not the highlight either. The real meat of the game is in the story and the choices you make. Overall, Vampyr is one of those games where the atmosphere and story carry it. If you're into moral dilemmas, gothic vibes, and a slower, more thoughtful pace, it's worth a shot. Just be ready for some clunky combat and a few rough edges. It's not perfect, but it's definitely got heart and fangs.
It is the curse of the gods. It is the hunger of the need for blood.
Far Cry Primal. Far Cry Primal is one of the more unique entries in the Far Cry series. Instead of guns and explosions, this one throws you all the way back to 10,000 BCE, the Stone Age. You're playing as Takar, a hunter from the Wenja tribe, and it's all about surviving, taming beasts, and conquering the land of Oros. So here's the deal. This game looks amazing. The world is full of lush forests, snowy mountains, and dangerous wildlife, and the attention to detail makes it feel alive. You're not just running around shooting enemies, you're crafting weapons like spears and bows, and even taming animals like wolves and saber-toothed tigers to fight alongside you. Honestly, having a giant bear wreck enemies for you, super satisfying. But here's where things get a little dicey. The gameplay feels a lot like your typical Far Cry, just with Stone Age tools instead of guns. Some players loved the change of pace, but others found it repetitive. In the story, it's there, but it's not going to blow your mind. It's more about exploring the world and mastering the survival mechanics. What really sets this game apart though is the animal taming system. You can control everything from owls for scouting to mammoths for pure destruction. It's easily the highlight of the game, and it makes combat feel fresh at least for a while. So is it worth playing? If you're a Far Cry fan and you want something different, Far Cry Primal is definitely worth a shot. It's not perfect, but it's fun, and the prehistoric setting makes it stand out. Just don't go in expecting a deep story. It's all about the survival vibes and taming cool beasts. If that sounds like your jam, give it a go. Biomutant. Okay, so picture this a post-apocalyptic world, but instead of dull grays and browns, everything's bursting with color. That's the setting for Biomutant, an action RPG where you play as a badass, customizable mutant critter. Sounds amazing on paper, right? And while the game doesn't nail everything, it's definitely unique. You're thrown into a world where the tree of life is dying, and it's up to you to decide its fate. Save it or let the world reset, it's your call. Along the way, you align with quirky tribes, fight massive bosses, and uncover a world filled with weird and wonderful creatures. The story's got potential, but the way it's delivered through an ever-present narrator can feel a bit off. It's charming for a while, but it might wear on you. Combat tries to be a mix of martial arts, shooting, and wild mutant powers, but it doesn't always hit the mark. It's fun at first, especially with all the flashy abilities, but it starts feeling repetitive. On the flip side, crafting is where the game shines. You can slap together crazy weapons from random junk you find, and it's genuinely satisfying to see your wild ideas come to life. The world itself is gorgeous, it's colorful, imaginative, and filled with places to explore, but while the map is big and packed with lore, some players felt the gameplay loop didn't do it justice. It can feel like you're checking boxes instead of uncovering something meaningful. So here's where Biomutant lands. It's got heart, creativity, and a unique vibe that stands out, but it's held back by some clunky mechanics and a formulaic structure. If you're into exploring vibrant, quirky worlds and don't mind a few bumps in the road, it's worth a try. Just go in knowing it's a little rough around the edges, but for some players that's part of the charm. Remember me. Imagine a future where memories can be digitized, sold, or stolen. That's the world of Remember Me, a 2013 action-adventure game from Dontnod Entertainment, the same studio behind Life is Strange. You play as Nealon, a memory hunter with the rare ability to remix and steal people's memories. Sounds cool, right? And honestly, it is cool, even if the game doesn't hit every mark. First off, the setting is fantastic. It's this futuristic Neo-Paris, and the city is gorgeous. The art direction is on point, with bright neon lights mixed with gritty, dystopian vibes. You really feel like you're walking through a world where technology has gone too far. The standout feature is the memory remixing. These sequences let you dive into someone's memories and change key details to alter their perception of events. It's super creative and adds a unique twist to the gameplay. I just wish there were more of these moments because they're easily the best part of the game. The combat, on the other hand, is a bit of a mixed bag. You get to customize your combos, which sounds awesome, but in practice it feels repetitive after a while. It's not terrible, but it's not the highlight either. The platforming and level design are pretty linear, so don't expect a ton of exploration. Story-wise, Remember Main is solid. It's got a strong main character, some interesting twists, and a cool message about the dangers of memory manipulation, but at times it feels like the gameplay doesn't live up to the potential of the story and setting. So, should you play it? If you're into cyberpunk aesthetics, unique concepts, and narrative-driven games, it's definitely worth checking out. Just go in knowing it's a little rough around the edges, but the world and ideas make it a ride worth taking. Watch Dogs. Ubisoft's 2014 open-world game that came out with sky-high expectations but ended up with a pretty rough reputation. If you were around during its launch, you probably remember the controversy. This game was hyped as the next big thing after GTA 5 with groundbreaking hacking mechanics and a futuristic spin on open-world gameplay, but when it finally dropped, people weren't happy. The biggest issue was that infamous graphics downgrade. The E3 2012 trailer looked incredible rain, soaked streets, stunning lighting, and insane attention to detail, but the final game didn't quite match that. It wasn't ugly by any means, but the downgrade was a huge letdown for players who were expecting a next-gen showcase. Then, there was the story. You play as Aiden Pierce, a hacker on a revenge mission after a family tragedy. On paper, it sounds fine, but Aiden's personality was bland. Critics called him boring and unrelatable, which made it hard to connect with the narrative. The tone of the game was also super serious, which clashed with the fun, chaotic potential of its hacking mechanics. Despite all that, Watch Dogs has aged better than you might think. For starters, the hacking system was and still is really cool. Being able to control traffic lights, overload power grids, or tap into security cameras adds a unique twist to missions. It gives you options for stealth, chaos, or a mix of both. Even compared to newer games, the hacking feels fresh. The open world Chicago is another highlight. Sure, it doesn't have the personality of a GTA city, but it's detailed and packed with activities. Whether you're messing around with CTOs or diving into side missions, there's plenty to keep you busy. And with modern patches and updates, the game looks better now than it did at launch, making it worth revisiting if you skipped it back then. So why play Watch Dogs now? It's a solid open world game that was overshadowed by its own hype. If you can get past the launch drama and temper your expectations, there's a lot of fun to be had. The hacking mechanics still feel unique, and it's worth experiencing where the franchise started, especially if you're a fan of the newer games. It's not perfect, but it's better than its reputation suggests. Mafia 3. The Mafia series is generally very well loved. Mafia 1, Mafia 2, and the masterpiece Mafia Definitive Edition. But Mafia 3? It's often considered the black sheep of the series. Let me explain. I only got into the Mafia series recently. I never played the original and started with Mafia Definitive Edition, The Story of Tommy Angelo. I absolutely loved it. The game was a perfect 10 out of 10 for me. Then I played Mafia 2. Sure, the graphics and gameplay felt a bit dated after the 2020 remake, but it wasn't a deal breaker. The story and atmosphere had me completely hooked, and let's not forget the amazing friendship between Joe and Vito. But then it was time for Mafia 3 and things got tricky. The game had terrible ratings on Steam with reviewers calling it trash, mainly because of the repetitive mission structure. I was confused how bad could it really be. What kind of repetitiveness were they talking about? Eventually, I decided to give it a try during a sale. Here's the thing, I totally agree with the reviewers about the boring, repetitive missions, clearing out enemy bases, and taking them over gets old fast. But honestly, I still enjoyed the game a lot. I simply skipped the side missions and focused on the main story. And wow, it was amazing. The villains were fantastic, and I really loved Link and Clay as the protagonist. I even played through all the DLCs. The Island DLC, in particular, stood out as a great experience. So here's my take. Mafia 3 is an amazing game that the developers kind of messed up by adding unnecessary filler missions. They probably wanted to match the increasing length of modern AAA games, which I personally hate. I prefer linear games, and Mafia 3's story, world, characters, music, and atmosphere are all fantastic. If you're playing on PC, I recommend installing a Reshade mod to fix the blurry graphics issues and enhance the visuals. Overall, don't let the bad ratings scare you off. While the reviews are right about the repetitive missions, the game is absolutely worth playing. Bulletstorm. Okay guys, so this is one of those games that went all in on being loud, over the top, and ridiculously fun. Released in 2011, it's a first-person shooter that throws seriousness out the window and just asks you to cause as much chaos as possible, and honestly, that's what makes it awesome. You play as Grayson Hunt, a former Black Ops soldier turned space pirate stranded on a hostile planet full of mutants, criminals, and things that generally want to kill you. The story's well, I guess it's fine. It's got revenge, betrayal, and a lot of foul-mouthed dialogue. It's not groundbreaking, but it knows what it's trying to be, which is being a backdrop for pure mayhem. Now, the real star of the show is the skill shot system. Instead of just shooting enemies and moving on, Bulletstorm rewards you for killing in the most creative, brutal, and ridiculous ways possible. Kicking someone into a cactus, bonus points. Using an explosive chain to take out a group, even better. The game encourages you to experiment with your weapons in the environment, and it's insanely satisfying when you pull off something wild. Visually, the game looked great for its time, and the 2017 remastered full clip edition made it even better with enhanced graphics. The gameplay still holds up too. It's fast, chaotic, and just plain fun. But not everything about Bulletstorm landed perfectly. The dialogue is packed with cringy one-liners and over-the-top profanity, which can feel like it's trying too hard to be edgy. The multiplayer mode, it's there, but it's pretty forgettable compared to the main campaign. So why is it worth playing now? Because it's one of the few shooters that focuses on having fun above all else. It doesn't take itself seriously, and that's refreshing in a genre full of grim, hyper-realistic games. If you're looking for a wild, adrenaline-fueled ride that rewards you for blowing stuff up in the most ridiculous ways possible, Bulletstorm is absolutely worth your time. Just lean into the chaos and enjoy the ride.